Hi there. When I woke up this morning and went to do my morning prayer, I was most put out to find that, well, I knew before that this is the end of summertime and the beginning of winter time. And for a while there, I was completely thrown, sort of disorientated, because, I do my morning prayer sometime around dawn. And of course, I live in the northern hemisphere, so obviously that changes. So we won't go into that too much. But the point is that but then when I thought about it, I thought to myself, well, this is the restoration of the actual time. I mean, I know that time doesn't exist, but let's not get smart about this. And it seems to me that it was a great feeling of restoration or relief that we're off what was called British summertime, which is just called summer standard time or something like that now. And we're off that and we're back to winter time. And I was thinking that about the tyranny of changing the hour, and which a lot of people have commented. In fact, when the 1920s, I think, when they actually introduced summertime, to Britain anyway. And of course, Ireland was part of Britain, so it was just British summertime, where the hour jumps forward. And then, of course, around about now, 26th of October, the hour goes back 1 hour, you see. Um, but now it feels like it's correct. It feels like this is the truth. This is the true time, as it were. And it was the British summertime, or the summertime, that was the false sort of time, and the one that you could never really get used to. Well, it used to take weeks to get used to. So I'm building up here a parallel argument, because I can imagine that, imagine on the equator, of course, 6 o'clock sunrise in the morning, 6 o'clock sunset. Okay, fair enough, because it's the equator. And I was imagining that, supposing all the countries, I mean, most of it's ocean, but all the countries are running along the equator, if they were ruled over by a tyrant, and this tyrant, quite arbitrarily and unnecessarily, decided that on the 26th of March of the year, all the clocks would go forward, and on the 26th of October, all the clocks would go back again. But then I imagined that, supposing this tyrant, he did that, but supposing this planet was very, very large indeed, and the time, the sort of half the year where the time had gone forward 1 hour, was a very long time, because it was a very large planet, and therefore, you would feel disorientated for longer. And the tyrant, he just puts the clocks forward for no good reason at all. So every time, you'd be looking out for the sun would tell you it's going down at sunset. The clock time face would be wrong. It would either be, I can't work it out. I suppose it'd be an hour earlier, so it would say 5 o'clock on your watch, but it would actually, the sun would be going down. And this would seem, for a long, long time, it would seem very disorientating and somehow weird. But then when the clocks went forward again, it would be back to normal. So your clock and the movement of the sun would correspond, would coincide. But if the clocks had been taken back 1 hour, then it wouldn't feel, your timepiece and the sun will be out of synchronicity. And to me, this is sort of symbolic, really, of the demiurge, as it were, for no good reason, making things change so that you're disorientated. I mean, obviously, you're going to say to me, well, you should go by the sun, never mind what it says on your clock. You go by the sun, because the sun is telling you the truth, and the sun sets at 6 on the equator and rises on the equator. So, but it would still seem that somehow something was wrong, in that half of the year. where the clocks had gone forward, it would seem all wrong. Basically, it wouldn't coincide, and you would feel sort of out of synchronicity, perhaps with society, with your village, with what your civilization, um, and you'd be kind of torn between what the sun was actually doing and what it was, and what it perhaps could be or should be doing according to your clock. You see. And then when the tyrant ordered the clocks to go back to the original time, back 1 hour, it would all be restored. And this restoration seems to me to be symbolic of going back to the supernal worlds, where everything is in sync with each other. Everything happens. It's not a matter of timing. Well, I suppose, of course, if time doesn't exist, then synchronicity can't exist. Well, it's all synchronistic. You see, every event is synchronistic with each other. So when there's no time or space, then everything will be kind of restored to a feeling of oneness again, which in these lower worlds or finite worlds or worlds of the demiurge, nothing feels true. Nothing feels there's something not quite right. There's something that's not synchronizing. There's something of your soul saying one thing, but your senses are saying another, and there's a sort of cognitive dissonance all the time. So this is my part parallel argument about the restoration of consciousness to the supernal worlds, to the world of the good God, how it would be. But then, of course, I looked at my parallel, which, by the way, only works on the equator, of course. And this tyrant only lives on the equator, or he only dominates all the countries on the equator. But when you get up to the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere, it becomes a bit more benign, because the original idea of putting clocks forward and backwards was to give farmers and school children an extra hour at each end of the half year. Like an extra hour of daylight in the morning in winter, and an extra hour of daylight in the evening for the summertime. You see, so it could be that this is an influence of a benign spirit, and although it's disorientating and weird, it's done for a higher purpose, sort of thing. It's done in order to give school children and farmers this extra hour at either end of the day, for at least one time in the year, for a few weeks. I mean, after a few weeks, it doesn't make any difference in the winter, especially because it's all just getting dark anyway. And we're talking about Ken, of course, the rune for light, and Yule at Yule. The light is getting less and less. So at this time of the year, that's this time of the winter, there's very little light, and the light and the days are closing in, and this, of course, is the summer solstice, where the light is strongest. So we're worshipping not necessarily the sun here; we're worshipping light, because, of course, light is sort of independent of the sun, isn't it? Really, in a way, because there's a pre-dawn light. And then there's a dusk, which is the light from the sun, even though it's setting below the horizon. You see, I'm awfully confused about all this kind of stuff, as you can imagine. I have trouble with this, really. Anyway, so I'm thinking about Ken and light, because light is very important to me, because I've got very poor eyesight. So the more light there is during the day, more sunlight, but more light, then the happier I am, basically. So I'm now I'm a light file. I love the light, and I don't like the darkness. I don't like when it's getting dark, because I can see very little, and I don't like the dawn too much, because I can't see very much at all, because there's not enough light to see by. So I guess that's another reason why I'm sort of worried about this thing about clocks going on and clocks going back, because it makes my experience of the light different, you see, according to the time of the year. I mean, maybe you never thought about all this, really, so you don't understand what on earth I'm on about. Anyway, so the benign spirit that's put that created British Summer Time and Universal Standard Time, the benign spirit is like the work of the Holy Spirit, because this world, right, is still the demiurge's world. It's just that there are benign spirits that do things that appear to be disorientating to us and perplexing to us, or at least on a temporary basis. But there's a higher purpose to what they do. Whereas the tyrant on the equator represents a tyrannical spirit, even within the demiurge. I mean, the demiurge is a tyrant anyway for the whole earth, but even under the demiurge, he's got lieutenants which are more tyrannical than him. And we have the sort of tyrannical spirit on the equator, which is forcing people to have this summertime and end of summertime when there's no need for it because they're on the equator. It's just literally an arbitrary thing that this tyrant has decided to do. And like Mubarak actually did in Cairo in Egypt, he just decided, he got up one day and decided when summertime was happening. So this isn't actually just a theoretical. I mean, Mubarak, backed by the CIA and Israeli intelligence services, he actually was a tyrant about the time. And it was, so the time of year when this happened, and of course Egypt is only just above the equator, really. He was completely arbitrary, and everybody just had to wait for the great president to decide when summertime was happening. So basically there are tyrants who do this kind of stuff. Presidents that just get up in the morning and say, right, we're having summertime now, whenever they feel like it. With all different dates as well. It's crazy, and everybody just has to know and adapt. And if you have Cairo, which is full of millions and millions of people, and they all have to just adapt to the change of time, which is horrible really for them. But there we are. That's life under the CIA-backed governments of Middle East, of course. Anyway, so I'm thinking that this is parallel arguments are actually not very accurate. You set up a parallel sort of metaphor, and there are lots of complications and inaccuracies that make this kind of arguing, comparing, because you're really comparing two different types of fruit, really, apples and oranges, and it breaks down. This kind of argument breaks down very easily, actually, under scrutiny. But it sort of just give you an idea, basically, that there is a benign spirit at work, which is doing the same thing as the tyrannical, malign spirit, but for a higher purpose than the malign spirit. That's what I'm really trying to say. So, don't always think that because something is awkward or disorientating or a bit weird, that it doesn't have a higher purpose to it. And the benign spirit is not actually behind it, working in this lower world, for your spiritual benefit. And that's actually perfectly possible. But there are malign spirits who just are tyrants and are just disorientating you and upsetting you for absolutely no reason, just simply because they like to. There is no higher purpose to what they do. So I hope that this little sort of parallel argument, given that it's not a very accurate argument, gives you some idea of what life is like in the lower worlds, but in the worlds of demiurge. But of course, ultimately, it is all very confusing and disorientating anyway. And one hopes for a time when space and time no longer exist and only oneness prevails.